Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Manikaran Singh and I am a research intern at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. It is a matter of great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all to another edition of the ICS Wednesday seminar titled India-China Relations: What Can Be Expected After Kazan? Following nearly 5 years of a protracted standoff on the LAC, leadership on both sides has reached a modus-vivendi on the way to breaking the impasse. There is a cautious optimism as the leadership from both sides has reopened discussions and communication across domains. The underlying belief on both sides is to avoid confrontation while accepting the need for healthy competition. Further, what led to the thaw in the relationship? What are the initial steps which will build confidence between the two to move forward while dealing with issues such as mutual trust and mutual respect to find a fair and just solution to resolve differences? More importantly, how will the relationship likely develop in an unpredictable world where the global order is changing rapidly and a balance of power is moving towards Asia? Some of these issues will be covered in this seminar with an emphasis on the military, diplomatic, economic aspects of the relationship. The speaker for today's seminar is Major General Mandeep Singh. Major General Mandeep Singh, SMBSM, is a third generation soldier and has served for 38 years in the Indian Army. He has been awarded Seva Medal and Vishisht Seva Medal for his distinguished service by the President of India. He is a visiting fellow at the Mercator Institute of China Studies, Berlin, a senior fellow at the Center for Land and Warfare Studies, Claus, and a distinguished fellow at the United Services Institute, New Delhi. He was also the Dean of the Army War College. Currently, he is the President Strategic Alliances at the Drone Acharya Aerial Innovations Limited, and he is also an advisor at the Technology Business Incubation Foundation at IT Roper. He has contributed to numerous national and international journals and magazines and also delivered numerous lectures. The chair for today's seminar is Dr. Atul Bhardwaj. Dr. Bhardwaj is a visiting fellow in the Department of International Politics at the City St. George University of London. He has obtained his doctoral degree in history from Ambedkar University, Delhi, and did his master's in war studies from the King's College, London. He is also an alumni of the National Defence Academy, Pune, and has served in the aviation branch of the Indian Navy for 2 decades. Formerly, he was a research fellow at the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, IDSA. He is the author of the book India-America Relations, 1942 to 62, rooted in the liberal international order. He has also worked as an associate editor in Business and Economy magazine and was the founding editor of two defense magazines, Purple Beret and Salute. Since 2013, Dr. Bhardwaj has also been writing a regular column on strategic affairs in Economic and Political Weekly. Before I hand over to the chair, I would like to ask all the participants to follow a few housekeeping rules. All participants shall be muted during the seminar. Questions may be posted in the chat box along with your name and affiliation. Alternatively, you may use the raise your hand option during the interactive session. You shall then be called upon to unmute yourself. Thank you. I now hand it over to the chair. Over to you, Dr. Bhardwaj. Thank you.
Thank you, Manikaran. Good to be back at ICS always. And I look forward to this hearing, General Mandeep, because it's an important and a very topical issue these days. And this relationship itself, India-China relationship, as we all know, is important in global geopolitics at the moment. Now, we all know that this year marks the sort of 75th anniversary of the diplomatic relationship between China and India, which began, of course, on the 1st of April 1949, when Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru recognized the communist government in China. So President Xi Jinping has already said that India-China relationship should take the form of a dragon-elephant tango. So both sides are looking forward to improving relations now, and mainly because the ties have been at a low over the past 5 years due to a military standoff along the disputed border. India's position has been that the situation on the border cannot be delinked from the broader bilateral relationship. So basically, the recent developments indicate that the India-China relationship is trying to disentangle itself from the complications which arose from the post-2020 border situation. A border patrolling agreement was signed in October 2024, and this has opened up sort of fresh avenues for resumption of broader bilateral engagement. If you actually see that, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar had hinted at this when he was speaking at the Nani Palkiwala Memorial Lecture in Mumbai in January this year. This was his first lecture, public lecture of the year. And he clearly hinted that at ensuing thaw in the India-China relationship. I quote him, and he clearly said that India has to prepare for expressions of China growing capabilities, particularly those that impinge directly on India's interests. All in all, he said that India's approach can be summed up in terms of three mutuals, that is, mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interest. Bilateral ties can also benefit from greater realization that what is at stake is actually the larger prospects of both nations, unquote. So the EM had summed up the China-India relationships as one of the core issues that confronts Indian diplomacy and Indian strategy at the moment. Currently, the relationship, we can say, is at a very nascent stage of normalization. Trump's tariff tsunami and other economic and geopolitical changes appear to be pushing the two towards rapprochement. However, questions about the sustainability of the normalization process remains in the realm of speculation. While both sides desire to avoid eruption of crisis from time to time, they have to reckon with the structural differences and the trust deficit which continues to exist between them. So where can China and India relationship go from the critical juncture? How are the shifts in regional and global postures and balances of power likely to affect this relationship? I won't take much time of yours, but to answer these questions and much more, our speaker today, General Mandeep Singh, who's a scholar warrior and who spends a lot of time learning about China and the evolving trajectories in India-China engagement, will take on from here. Sir, it's all yours. And as has already been discussed, that we would take about till 3:45. Your lecture could continue. From there on, we'll shift to the question answer session. It's all yours, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Let me just see if my screen is up. Let me just get the screen up. Let me see. Am I visible? Is
Yes.
the screen visible?
Yes, Major Mandeep Singh. Your slide is visible. Please make it full
Let me
screen.
get the first slide. Now the full screen is. Hello, why is it not full screen? I'll have to just. Okay. Is that okay now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right. Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Manikaran and Atul. Grateful. I'll go straight deep dive into the topic, and like it said, India-China relations. What can be expected post Kazan? Okay. As usual, a disclaimer. These views are entirely mine and in no way represent the views of the Indian Army or the Government of India or any organization. So this is entirely my own thought process. Okay. Right. I am going to start by taking you to 3rd December 2024, where the finance minister made a statement in the parliament. And what he said was very important because that is the start point of my argument today, which says twin considerations of an unstable local situation and an impacted bilateral relationship were clearly the drivers for these recent endeavors, right? These are the two, and I'm going to now inquire into these two issues of unstable local situation and bilateral relationship to say and to justify what has actually brought this thaw to happen. So when we look at the relations between India and China, the entire gamut comes in four major issues: the border dispute, China's support to Pakistan, the gathering Chinese footprint in India's neighborhood, and of course the burgeoning trade deficit. So let me take each one of these issues and see what happened in the last 5 years that led on to the so-called thaw that we talk about in the relations. Let me take this one by one. So the last 5 years, an assessment, okay. So the situation in the border dispute has been termed as sensitive and tense. But let's see what happened. For the first time ever, you had between 50 and 60,000 troops on both sides coming face to face. And this was in 2020 and continues as we speak. Now, that's a huge amount of force. Please remember that while the Indian troops have been on the LAC for a very long time, almost for ever since independence, the Chinese troops that came on and are there now were not there all the time. And the initial winters that they spent in 2020 and 21 were difficult. It's not easy to sustain such a large troop concentration on such altitudes. It's telling on the infrastructure, and therefore there was a need for massive infrastructure development. There was a lot had to be done in terms of habitat, of logistics, of things like, for example, ammunition, for example, vehicles and equipment. All of that comes with a cost. With extreme weather in such inhospitable terrain. And these were, and then on top of it all, because of the tension, there was a huge impetus on defense weapons. We saw a lot of new weaponry coming up on both sides on the LAC, whether it was missiles or aircrafts or new types of land-based weapons. All this added to the tension. More importantly, border trade stopped entirely. Local populations that benefited from the border trade, they were affected. There were new border laws that we saw from China, for example, which insisted or enforced their sovereignty and which caused some consternation in India. The coming up of 628 Xiaogong villages. We now believe that 427 are completed in the first year and about 201 in the second year. All these with intent and protests in between to say, particularly from the Indian government side, to say that it's changing the status quo. And then we also had a clash in Yangtze in 2022. So all in all, the last 5 years, there's been a huge cost to both the militaries. And like the EAM said, it's not been business as usual. Let's look at the second aspect. China's support to Pakistan. It literally has been, as I say, testing the Chinese patience. What you see is a failing CPEC. Just to give you a little bit of data, out of 122 projects totaling about 87 billion, as we look at the report card 10 years down the line, barely 32 have been completed, totaling about $20 billion. So if you look on your right on this figure, in the green, that's the number of projects completed. And so much of what is either in preparatory stage or has been announced or delayed or even shelved. And so the story about CPEC is not a very encouraging story. And then the killings of Chinese engineers, the technicians, that continues from 2017 onwards. We are seeing incidents of attacks on Chinese engineers, Chinese people, Chinese technicians. The Pakistan government has, in fact, committed to almost 15,000 troops. It's equivalent of 2 divisions worth to secure Chinese interests, but that has not really worked. And so there are now reports to say that there are private security companies, for example, which are there from China, which are looking after their interests. And then there is political unrest. There's political uncertainty. You see what's happening with the Imran Khan government. You're seeing a series of problems happening in Pakistan. So there is no continuity of government. And because of the lack of continuity of government, decision making has been bad. And that has been impacting the relationship between China and Pakistan. And then the present government in 2022, I think Pakistan announced a policy of neutrality, which said that they would balance the relationship between US and China. And when you really look at it, this neutrality actually diminishes the Chinese influence and dependence that Pakistan, or at least was intended by the Chinese to have Pakistan, or to create dependence. So neutrality is not much appreciated insofar as the Chinese are concerned. If you look at the BRI and the larger aspect of the BRI, I mean, why only the CPEC? Broadly, the BRI has been in two areas of construction and of investment, or some should I say infrastructure development and investment. And if you see this graph, it's very telling. And you see everything from the heydays of 2017, 18. This is for 10 years, from 2013 to 2023. And you see everything diminishing as we look at 2023, whether it is construction or whether it is investment. All of it has reduced. And so CPEC is a subset of BRI, and the larger aspect of BRI has been undergoing problems. There are problems here. The second aspect of the relationship with Pakistan, obviously, is the collusivity factor. And no one better than the army chief, when he spoke on the 8th of March at the India Today conclave, he said, let me quote, "What we have to understand is that we have to be very clear that there is a high degree of collusivity which we must accept." So in terms of virtual field, it is nearly 100% virtual field, cyber, etc. And in terms of physical, I would say most of the equipment is of Chinese origin. So this is the situation as of today as far as collusivity is concerned. And what it means as far as I am concerned is the two-front threat is a reality from me, unquote. And so if you look on your right top, Pakistan's arms imports between 2020 and 24 have been a figure of 81%. And that's up from an average of 74% in the past 5 years, according to SIPRI report. And Pakistan absorbs 63% of China's global arms exports, almost worth 45,300 crores. So when we look at this relationship, yes, the collusivity aspect is an issue of concern as far as India is concerned. Let's look at what's happening in the gathering. Is it the gathering or is it a receding Chinese footprint in India's neighborhood? Let's take Bangladesh. The loss of space in Bangladesh post the recent coup against Sheikh Hasina's government has not gone down well with the Chinese. They were the largest trading partner of China for 12 years in a row. And now you have a problem where there are doubts as to whether that kind of bonhomie, that kind of trade will continue. Already there is problems in their garment industry. Layoffs are large. Factories are closing. There's this problem about St. Martin's Island. St. Martin's Island apparently is a touchy aspect because St. Martin's Island on the tip of the Chittagong Hill Tracts, just off Cox's Bazar, is strategic because it gives a look into Myanmar, of course, and also easy access into the area in east of Myanmar and China, the area of Kunming, of Sichuan. This has been talked about and has been a bone of contention. And then there is this concern that Bangladesh is a member of the BRI, and so would there be a pushback due to US pressure? Let's look at Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has already pushed back against the BRI. They have been concerned about the debt trap, especially after the Hambantota experience. And so you're seeing a balancing act that's been happening over a period of time with governments. And then recently, President Desanayake, he has, of course, he went first to India and as part of the neighbor first policy. And so you see a balancing act being done there, where there's been a restructuring of their $4.8 billion debt. He went to Beijing, where he was able to get some concessions on that, on expressways construction, a $3.7 billion refinery, which has come up near Hambantota. So, while not to say that the trip to India, there was an agreement on the development of the Kankesan port, a lot of joint projects on energy, especially on renewable energy, defense cooperation, passenger ferry service, digital public infrastructure, etc. So you see that there is a fine balancing act being done by Sri Lanka. Insofar as Maldives is concerned, yes, there was an increase in Chinese influence earlier. And in fact, the Moise government came into power due to an India Out campaign, where they got about $127 million in aid to development roads and some big projects. For example, the Friendship Bridge, military assistance and surveillance. If you recall, the Indian military personnel were actually sent out from there, and some building of social housing units, etc. So there was euphoria in Maldives, but very soon there has been a realization that you cannot do away with your neighbors. And the recent visit of President Moise to India was a realization. And India has provided $100 million treasury bills, currency swap of 400 million, inauguration of a runway on the new international airport, connectivity project. So there is a realization that there is another balancing act that you see, which is being done by the Maldives. And then finally, if you look at Nepal, for the second time, the Chinese cobbled together a CPN, Maoist-Leninist, and a CPN kind of a coalition along with the NC support, with an agreement that they'll have an alternate prime minister for 18 months. I don't know if it's going to work. Last time it didn't. There's also concerns of the MCC, which is a $500 billion US-led consortium. This presence has been strong, and it tends to challenge the BRI. And even on the BRI, if you see in Nepal, there were a total of 35 projects. Only 9 are left. So there has been some kind of a pushback and some kind of worry and concern in Nepal about the debt trap. Lastly, the burgeoning trade deficit. I'll draw your attention to the figures on the right bottom in the circles. Quite surprisingly, we are looking at this period of the standoff and the Galwan crisis, but the trade, the deficit has actually gone up. And so that means that there has been considerable amount of imports from China, despite the standoff on the LSE. Just to give you some figures, the bilateral trade went up by 4% between financial FY 23 and 24. And China has once again become India's top trading partner, surpassing the United States. Even in FDI, and I'll talk about it later, China occupies 22nd position. So the issue has been about the trade deficit. And the ballooning trade imbalance has left India with a cumulative trade deficit over 334 billion over the past 5 years. But that was a matter of concern. And so then you have the Economic Survey of India report, and which says very clearly that India faces two choices to benefit from China plus one strategy. You can integrate into China's supply chain or promote FDI India from China. So amongst these choices, focusing on FDI from China seems to be more promising, and that is what has been echoed much later, even by the finance minister. Among the choices see on your right, focusing on FDI from China seems to be more promising for boosting India's exports to US, similar as to how the East Asian economies did in the past. So there was a precedence and model existing. So I come back to the first slide, which said an unstable local situation and an impacted bilateral relationship. And so in my opinion, the last 5 years have seen instability in South Asia, especially in India's neighborhood. So that's the local situation part. While the bilateral relationship between India and China has been severely impacted, and that's the border dispute and the trade part. And in my view, both nations have realized the futility of the continued hostility and sought a rapprochement to the benefit of both nations. So what are, aside from this argument, what are the other drivers of the thaw? And the first, I think, is geopolitics. It's been very clear now that there's a shifting world order, much spoken about. There's a declining US power and shift towards Asian century that's been talked about. And so the leadership has many times said cooperation rather than competition is the way forward in the relationship. I've spoken about the economics. An interesting thing that happened was that all the economic and trade mechanisms built over the confidence that both nations had secured since 1988, whether it's the joint group on economy and trade, whether it's the financial dialogue, whether it's the strategic economic dialogue, all of them had come to a halt. And so to address the trade deficit, these need to be kickstarted. The next issue is about the uncertainty in China-US relations, especially over Taiwan. So what you're seeing, as much as close as yesterday, where you find the Eastern Theater Command actually launching its largest ever exercise, and that's a tri-service exercise all around Taiwan, with indicators this time that this is the biggest ever. There is, in my view, a realization that if they are going to have trouble in the South China Sea and against Taiwan, it's better to keep one flank secure. And thus, and that suits Chinese interests. When I say one flank secure, I look at the LAC. The next point is India's declared neutrality. Time and again, India has declared neutrality, its strategic autonomy, its commitment to multipolarity. It serves China's interest because a thaw in the relationship would actually incentivize India to remain neutral and not bend towards or lean towards one camp. And from our interest, strictly from India's interest, India needs time to build deterrence while focusing on development. And so that much needed time to build deterrence is in our interest. So how did it unfold? In September 2024, you heard Mr. Jaishankar announce that 75% of the disengagement problems were sorted out. So that actually got the ball rolling, and then it was becoming clearer and clearer that there is an understanding that is coming out, and that there would be something in the offing. And on 21st of October, he announced that we reached an agreement on patrolling, and we have gone back to the 2020 position. That's important. With that, we can say that the disengagement with China has been completed. And of course, details will come out in due course, unquote. And so all this was actually a build-up to the October 23 meeting with the highest leadership, Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping, meeting on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Kazan. And then what you see, the fallout of that is also very, very sequential. On 18 December, you have the meetings of the special representatives. On 20th, you have the defense ministers meeting. And then once most of things are finalized, you have the Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri going in January to iron out and work out the nitty-gritties of the implementation of this understanding. Let me just take you some of the statements. It's important. The statement by the MEA on the meeting at Kazan talked about 4 things, and they are highlighted in color. The importance of handling differences and disputes and not allowing them to disturb peace and tranquility. The meeting with the special representatives at an early date. The third point was important is the relevant dialogue mechanisms at the level of foreign mission, other officials would be utilized to rebuild bilateral relations. And lastly, the need to progress these bilateral relations from a strategic and long-term perspective. Enhance strategic communication and explore cooperation. So there are 4 issues that were agreed upon, which is what translates into actions as we go ahead. Whereas the MOFA statement, it added, aside from what is spoken, 2 points. One is development is now the biggest share goal of China and India. And the other issue was this mention of China's Shanghai Cooperation Presidency and to strengthen cooperation communication with China and BRICS and multilateral frameworks. This was an add-on which finds mention in the Chinese statement. But I think I am going to delve more on the 18 December meeting between the SRs, NSA Doval and Wang Yi. And each one of these is very, very important. The first thing is it reaffirmed their commitment to implementing past agreements. So this belief that all these agreements signed 1993, 96, 2003, 2006, 2013, all of these were in a kind of a limbo. And so here is a reaffirmation of the implementation of the past agreements. The second issue is to find a fair, reasonable, and mutually acceptable resolution to the boundary dispute. And it talks about the 2005 political framework agreement. So there is a renewed commitment to resolve the boundary dispute. And so what we are essentially saying is that the SR mechanism is back on track. The third is an acceptance of refining border management protocols to avoid future accidents. So in military parlance, I would say that there is a need now to lay down the rules of engagement. So for example, how are we going to carry out patrolling? What is going to be the state of, say, a kind of weapons that would be available or located or deployed or carried? We're already seeing P2P kind of actions. For example, the resolution or the resumption of the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, cooperation on the transborder rivers. This was the data exchange on the river waters. And most importantly, as far as the border trade aspect was concerned, is starting the trade to Nathula, which was there hitherto. Fifth is the enhancing and coordination between diplomatic and military mechanisms. So what we are seeing is the various military mechanisms, the meeting between senior commanders, local commanders, WMCC, diplomatic corps, etc. All this, it's emphatically said that these need to continue. And last point is the meeting of the next round of the SRs next year. I think that is 2025 this year. I think that should be on very soon. So these are very important actually. These the MEA meeting between Wang Yi and the G20 summit, aside from what has already been spoken, there is a recognition of that the disengagement has contributed to maintenance of peace and tranquility. And I talk about a multipolar world, including a multipolar Asia. And that is important, including a multipolar Asia. The MOFA statement was similar in lines, except that it's the MOFA statement that actually brings out that the issue about what Atul Bharadwaj mentioned about the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and India. And so we should see a lot of activity in this year in terms of of celebrating this 75th anniversary, and which should also add to the thaw in the relationship. Let me now take you through the process of disengagement. And this slide I borrowed straight from Sahib Singh Chadda from the Carnegie India, who's done a yeoman service by writing that paper on the disengagement. An interesting thing on this slide is if you see those dots, those are basically meetings and between at various levels. So what you see is that whenever there has been a concentration of these dots, or there's been a hectic parleys, it has resulted in disengagement. So whether it was in Galwan in August of 2020, or whether it was North and South Bank of Pangong, so in February 2021, or at Gogra in August 2021, and then PP15 in September 2022. But then you see that after that, out of the 7 friction points, 2 were left, Demchok and Depsang. And these 2 I'm going to cover in a little bit of detail as I go along as to why there's been a delay in settling this issue. What is the relevance of these 2 places? And just for your information, the entire process is 3 stages. Disengagement. Disengagement means moving back from an eyeball to eyeball contact. De-escalation, which means moving the forces back to your original places where you were deployed in a peace mode. And de-induction is removal of all additional forces that have been brought into the theater. So we are at the moment only at the disengagement part. That's the first phase. The importance of Depsang. Now, this is in many ways connected to the Siachen Glacier and the location of the Siachen Glacier. Just to show you on this map, the Siachen Glacier, this triangle, is critical in the sense, if you see, there's on your west is Pakistan, on your north is China, and on the east is India. This map must be looked at carefully, and it must be understood because the Shaksgam Valley was given in 1963 under an agreement to China by Pakistan. And what the agreement says is, Article 6 on your right says that the 2 parties have agreed that after the settlement of the Kashmir dispute between Pakistan and India, the sovereign authority concerned will reopen negotiations with the sovereign and the People's Republic of China on the boundary. So whoever gets the J&K issues after its resolution, PRC will renegotiate on the Shaksgam Valley. Provided that in the event of that sovereign being Pakistan, the provisions of the present agreement and the aforesaid protocol shall be maintained. So in other words, if this continues to remain with Pakistan, then Shaksgam Valley will remain with China. But if it is India, then it will be renegotiated. But what's the issue? If you see the arrow in the red, this is a narrow strip of land which, when connected, would actually threaten the entire defenses and turn the defenses of Siachen Glacier. And Depsang is located right here. This is Shaksgam and this is Akshayching. And so Depsang is relevant in that it is a sliver of land, I think it's about approximately 80 kilometers, which prevents the defenses of Siachen, which are on the west here, from being untenable. What about the issue of Y junction and bottleneck? What is the problem here? Now, earlier, see, these were PP 10, 11, 12, and 13, which were patrolled before 2020. And the terrain is such that this side is Depsang on the west, and this is Y Junction. Earlier, there was this area was blocked, and patrolling was not permitted, particularly post 2020. Now, with the resolution of this agreement that has now been signed, patrolling has commenced to all these PPs. What about Demchok? And I'll draw your attention to the map on the left. If you see Demchok from a larger perspective, on the right side is the crucial G219. This is the lifeline between Xinjiang and Tibet. This highway, G219. And at Demchok, it is the closest. And on your right, if you see this beeping figure, this feature on the right in the orange is India, and this height here dominates the G219. Also, from an Indian perspective, the Indus River, which unfortunately is not marked here, it is this arrow here. This is where the Indus enters into India, and it is essential to prevent the Chinese from accessing the Indus and therefore the area up to the Indus. So Demchok's importance is in the fact that India is able to dominate this lifeline. Just another view. This is that feature from where on your right of your map you can look at G219. On your left is the Indus River. Okay, so what is the situation now, and what did the army chief say on the 14th of January in his press conference just before Army Day? And these are very important, and I've taken extracts of this. The first thing he said is that troop deployment directly depends on the trust factor and the capabilities created on either side. The current capabilities across the frontier entail we need to maintain troop levels. So what he's essentially saying is that if you are talking about de-escalation, first there is a need to establish strategic trust. And once that is established, it is the level of strategic trust that will dictate the level of troops being maintained on there. Next, he says, as far as verification patrolling is concerned, 2 rounds have already been completed by both sides over a period of time, and both are quite satisfied with it. So therefore, this is a reinforcement of the point I made that those areas which were no-go areas, patrolling on ground has commenced. And that it is and verification has been done, and it is to the interest of both parties. There has been no areas of concern. And so 2 rounds of patrolling have been done successfully. He also says that I have authorized my co-commanders to handle these issues at ground level with respect to patrolling and grazing, so that these trivial issues can be resolved at military level itself. That's a very important thing. Normally, small misunderstandings, they need to be handled at the local level. And so now local commanders have been empowered and delegated to handle minor differences of perception and not let it escalate, not let a minor issue escalate. And that's an interesting thing. It also says and confirms that besides patrolling, grazing by graziers has also commenced. And the last issue which I'd like to mention about, which has been finding a lot of talk, is about this thing about buffer zone. So very categorically, the chief has said there is nothing called a buffer zone. Where you feel that the nature or the degree of violence can be high and the fuse is short, you create some distance. And so when carried out, these negotiations over a period of time, some places were declared as a temporary moratorium. It means that both sides will remain back and will not go to the common areas, because we still feel that if we meet at those places, the violence level will go high. So what is essentially trying to say is that there is a mutual acceptance to avoid areas where the perception of LAC is likely to cause some kind of disagreement a misunderstanding or violence. And this talk about buffer zone, there are no buffer. So that's very, very clear with the chief. I have to just, in passing, mention this is an important point. This thing about and the economic side is about the press note 3. And what press note 3 is, and that's going to impact a lot of, as we talked about in economic circles and trade. It says that, and it says that an entity of a country which shares land border with India, where the beneficial owner of an investment into India is situated or is a citizen of any such country can invest only under the government route. What it implications in the green says that this amendment restricts investment in India directly or indirectly from an entity incorporated in any of the 7 countries that share land border with India without prior government approval. So the amendment brought out will actually has an impact on the Chinese companies or companies which have the beneficial owners located in China. The point I'm trying to flag is that this was posted on 18th of April 2020, before the Galwan incident. Okay, so we'll come back to this. As it stands, there is no mention whatsoever any quarters of this being revoked. So what can we expect in the future? From a political side, I think the commencement of political dialogue at various levels will build a certain degree of strategic trust. And therefore, the reactivation and coordination of these coordination and cooperative mechanisms that have been built painstakingly over the last so many years and so many decades, their reactivation is likely. The hype on 75th anniversary of India-China relations, I'm confident, will bring about a larger P2P religious cultural intercourse. As it is, there is engagements that have started between think tanks, increase in level of interaction between people, visas, etc. So that should all build strategic trust. And all of it, will it result in a possible summit meeting between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi is something that is possible. But if it happens, I think that would only add to the strategic trust. But then one has to be cautious. And like I said, cautious optimism. Pinpricks will continue. Say, for example, on 25th of December, there was an approval of a hydropower dam on the Sangpo, which has an impact on the lower riparian states like India and Bangladesh. And India lodged a protest. This is just days after this agreement. Again, on 27th December, just 2 days later, China announced the creation of 2 counties, Hian and Hikan in Xinjiang. And these are actually, again, India protesting because these include parts of the Union Territory of Ladakh. So we will see these pinpricks as we go along. On the economic side, what can we expect? I think this is one area where there's going to be a definite increase in economic activity with interest, with the intention of reducing the trade deficit. One notes on the 23rd of July, Reuters reported soon after the budget that India's net FDI inflows dropped by 62.17% from $27.9 billion to $10.58 billion 1 year alone. This was the lowest in 17 years. And so the finance minister was cautious by saying that we want business, we want investments, but we also need safeguards. India is in a very sensitive neighborhood. I cannot blindly welcome FDI without considering where it comes from. So what you see is caution. What you see is possibility increase in FDI from China. But there will be safeguards. We already seen visas of Chinese technicians will be opened. In fact, last week there have been an announcement of a $10 billion BYD car factory in Telangana, and and the order for 70,000 axles for railway coaches by by the Indian, I think it's the coach factory, which is ordered from China. So there is this impetus that we see slowly but steadily, which is building up. Will there be a review of the press note 3? Well, I'm not sure. I can't answer. We'll wait and see. And far as military part is concerned, patrolling will now continue as hitherto. The good thing is that there is a dispute resolution between local commanders which is in place. So there will be differences of perception. There will be, patrols which will say that there will be disagreement, etc. But then with this dispute resolution mechanism, I see that it will be resolved amicably. And board of personnel meetings, scheduled meetings, especially on these special days which are held, they will be re-established, and you will see more interaction on the borders. The management of LAC is important. The past agreements and protocols which were in akimbo should see gradual implementation. For example, what should you do in case of exercises, intimation of number of troops, participation. All this was there in the 2006 CBMs, the border management agreement. So all of this, once this comes in, a certain degree of confidence will build in between the two militaries. But on the part of de-escalation, I think that is unlikely in a hurry, and it's not going to happen. This reduction of troops is not going to happen in a hurry. Side by side, I see, as I mentioned, that there's a need for this time to build deterrence. So you will see the development of infrastructure, habitat, conduct of training, essentially all activities to build a conventional and strategic deterrence. Lastly, I must bring this out about this Mao KG interview. A lot of people have been talking about it in March. This gentleman is from the NDRC. Apparently, he has some credibility. What does he say about the India-China thaw? And if you'll see, he believes that US-India relations are likely to cool during Trump's time because he feels that Trump administration is not giving the requisite emphasis on the Indo-Pacific strategy. And so therefore, since there's less emphasis, the relevance of India would minimize. But if you see down below in the green, what he says is, even if India is not genuinely friendly towards China, the mere facade of a Sino-India friendship could help India increase its value in the eyes of the US. And so from this perspective, I believe there is a real possibility of an upcoming thaw in China-India relations. So an interesting perspective from a Chinese side. Lastly, let me conclude by Prime Minister Modi's interview on the 16th of March. I think that kind of sums up the way forward. He said, in 2020, and I quote, in 2020, the incidents along the border created significant tensions between our countries. However, after my recent meeting with President Xi, we have seen a return to normalcy at the border. We are now working to restore conditions to how they were before 2020. And promptly, the very next day, the Global Times came out with this piece which says, Modi's remarks underscore the Indian government's current pragmatic approach to advancing China-India relations, building positive momentum since the Kazan summit of the leaders. His remarks align with the broader trend of bilateral ties returning to a path of stable and healthy development. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll stop here. If there are any questions, please shoot.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving us a broad overview of what's been happening after Kazan and the challenges that are currently being faced in, mending this relationship, which has been mending this relationship, which has actually gone into a limbo for the last 5 years. with a lot of clauses coming in, which restricts trade, which restricts engagements, restricts overflights, and all that. So all that is likely to ease in the coming days as we see it. Largely because from the Indian side, if you see, the finance ministry has been pushing this, pushing for this thaw, because China, as we all know, is one of the biggest economies of the world, in $18 trillion economy, and which is just next door to us. Therefore, since we are looking at advancing our economy to $10 trillion soon by 2030, there is very little that, we don't have much options but not to interact with China, which is one of the biggest factories of the world. Not just the biggest factory of the world, but it is also now, in terms of technology, China has advanced quite a bit. In terms of artificial intelligence, they've proven themselves. In terms of building big in cars, the BYD, as we all know, has been, storming the entire Europe, and I see them also on the Indian roads now. So, with all these challenges coming up, our economy needs a better relationship with China. And it's a catch-22 situation for us. If we don't develop economic heft, we will never be able to, play a bigger role in our neighborhood, where China is already having a large footprint. So economic heft makes us, makes our position a little stronger, even in our neighborhood. I may not agree with the Chinese scholar who says that Trump would like to see a good Indo-Chinese relationship, because Trump's focus at the moment may not be China, but his larger strategic focus remains China. He is building relationships also with Russia, largely because he wants to focus on China and wants to focus on the Indo-Pacific. Therefore, my question is basically that, is this process, largely because once the Indo-Pacific and the Quad summit happens, where the West has always been saying that India remains non-committal, especially because it wants to balance with China. So in that respect, and with the kind of coercive diplomacy which Trump employs, whether we will be able to sustain this kind of peace process with China, or developing, the elephant and dragon tango, for how long it can continue. The moment Quad summit happens, and if Trump forces us to take a stance on particular issues in the Indo-Pacific, then those challenges face our diplomacy. So we'll see how it moves along during the course of next, say, couple of years. So the House is now open to question and answer session, and anyone who wants it, you can take one or two questions together, and you can answer them. Okay.
I would like to ask the participants to please post their questions in the chat box, or you can alternatively raise your hands here. While we are waiting for the questions from the participants, I have one question for Major General. Sir, while you were putting out those, first of all, I would like to thank you for this comprehensive and informative presentation, which has covered the whole gamut of the current relations, while also bringing in the Indian neighbors in it. One of the things that even Dr. Bhardwaj brought in was coming of Trump at the helm of USA. While it is impacting India and China, will also have, as has been repeatedly said by several scholars and researchers around the world, that it will impact relations between different countries around the world. What are your opinions on the impact of Trump on Indian Bangladesh and Indian Pakistan relations?
General Mandeep, you may answer these two questions, one which I have posed and which the Manikaran has.
Yeah. So I think on the India-Bangladesh, while it's very difficult to interpret a lot of what is coming out of White House for the time being, we are only into the first 100 days. I think that portion is very clearly summed up by that press conference where he said on Bangladesh, I leave it to PM Modi. Right. So I think that is telling on it on a lot of what about India-Bangladesh relations. Insofar as India-Pakistan is concerned, at the moment, it's rather early to even draw a conclusion. I have yet to see anything happening from the new administration so far as Pakistan is concerned, which is concrete, or any changes or shift at all. So for the time being, it's difficult to believe that there will be any major changes. There was some talk in the previous administration of getting back the lost space that the Americans had lost once they hurriedly exited Afghanistan uh, by losing out the carefully nurtured space they had gathered over a period of 10, 12 years. So that was then. What is going to happen with the present US administration? I'm afraid I think we need to just wait for a little bit more before we draw any conclusions.
So if you could answer that question of mine about the sustainability of this entire process, peace building process, or the improved relationship between India and China, and how long will it be able to sustain, the Quad summit and the pressure which is likely to come from the Quad members on for India to be more committed towards Quad.
Yes, so India's strategic autonomy has been put to test time and again. I mean, there are views and counter views. There are people who have questioned it to say that if we look from one point of view, Chinese, they said that there is one of the reasons that perhaps was given of Galwan was that India was leaning towards the US. And then you see the other side, which is to say that the very thaw that is happening, India's presence in SCO, for example, in BRICS, for example, all of this seems to suggest that that there is a difference in perception, and that India continues to maintain a fine thread. So this issue of neutrality, for the time being, is coming under question. And I think there's going to be stress when we have the Quad meeting, how much we can withstand the view or the pressure will require some deft diplomacy. And I have no doubt about it. For the time being, yes, you already heard the US President Trump say that PM is a shrewd negotiator and a tough negotiator. So I personally feel that we should be able to maneuver through any such pressure. But again, like I said, it's early times. A lot of people, a lot of conclusions. Let's not give too much in the first 100 days. Let's see how things pan out in some time.
Or do you think that is it also likely that India is taking its chance because India see that there is a window of opportunity available, because as Trump remains busy disengaging with Europe, building ties with Russia, and likely to focus on Iran. So you think India feels that before he comes down heavy on China, there is a window of opportunity which India can use and sort of gather some
I
by
don't
engaging with China?
I don't think it's a question of looking at opportunity or a window or so. I think whatever is going to happen between India and China is going to be in the best interests of both countries. And the issues are essentially two: the border dispute and the trade. I mean, if you really see the two issues, and if these two issues can find a solution, can find mutual accommodation, mutual trust, those mutual interest, those three mutuals that you mentioned about of the AM, I see no reason why a third, uh, uh, whether it is the United States or Russia or anybody else, should in any way impede on this relationship. So I think in the way this thaw is going, the way these interactions are going, I think we should be able to build better strategic trust between the two, irrespective of the pressures from outside.
Any questions from the floor? You know, another issue which is coming up is that, you know, you mentioned in your slide that you are basically looking that India is basically looking at the FDI from China. And FDI from China means that Chinese would come in and invest in our factories here. Chinese would come and set up factories here, because we've not really been able to take full advantage of the China Plus factor. So now we are looking at the FDIs which will come in and sort of make more investments in India, and we open up to China now. So do you think that is the right kind of strategy, rather than trying to, you know, attract the Western FDIs?
Well, I'm not an economist to really be able to comment on this as a strategy or a policy, but I can't shy away from what the economic survey has said, and that's pretty candid and very clear. And it does find, out of the two options, it does find the FDI route as a better way of bridging the trade deficit. And so what you're saying is that the value that we are adding by importing and building and then sending it to the West, or exporting to the West, rather than that, why not have Indian companies come and invest here and then add more value and then export? Let them export out from here so that it adds more value. So in other words, my understanding is that therefore that should reduce the trade deficit considerably. If there is any other way, I mean, as an economist, I'm very happy to hear it, but I really am not too qualified to be able to suggest on such economic issues. I think the FDI should help. I mean, we're already seeing a couple of, if the BYD, for example, comes in, it will and it will bring in a lot of associated transfer of technology. For example, EVs, batteries, right? That would come in. We should see cheaper cars. And so I think what has been suggested is at the right way.
Manikaran, are there any questions, please?
Yes, sir. There are a few questions. The first one is from Akshat. He's asking, while cooperation over competition seems like the way to go, yet as both India and China continue to grow economically, it would seem almost inevitable that the two Asian giants would come face to face once again. Could you please share out your thoughts on it, probably to geopolitics or geoeconomic lens?
Okay, so is that for me or for Dr. Bhadwaj?
This is
all
from
questions for you, sir.
Right. Okay. So see, at the moment, the differential is enormous. You've got 5 trillion versus 18 trillion, got to 3 trillion, 3.2 trillion versus 18. So that's about 5 times. Chinese are 5 times bigger. So I don't see a clash at the moment in any way. It is not in the near future. So let us give more time to the development of the economic trade and relationship. Confrontation When later, if at all, well, that's a long shot, a long way to go, considering the kind of divergent trajectories that exist for the time being.
There's a question from Shurbi Sharma. Uh, she asks, what are the major impacts on India after China has opened the trade points with Nepal?
I'm, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not too conscious about the trade with Nepal. Although I do believe that one of the most important things that happened when the new government was formed was to open all the 4 trading points for the first time in 5 years. What is the impact and what are the figures? I'm sorry, I cannot give. But all those 14 border trade points which were closed over this period of time have been opened. Secondly, the government, surprisingly, the provincial government of Tibet has promised to fund education and healthcare and livelihood of all the border districts of Nepal for the next, I think, for the next 5 years. Basically, to build back confidence between the two border communities. And so, aside from that, of course, the debt restructuring and the assistance to the government in various other ways. That has happened, but I'm not too sure how much of that in terms of figures or facts is going to impact. If it's open, definitely it will increase the trade, but I can't support with any facts or figures.
Sir, another question about neighborhood, which I would like to ask is because you focused a lot on the neighborhood issues, that how China's growing footprint in our neighborhood is one of the reasons for the tensions between the two of us. Now, do you think that it is really, can't we coexist with China in our neighborhood? Because they are having a bigger footprint. We can't match the kind of investments there, the infrastructure and the investments they are bringing to Bangladesh or Nepal or to Sri Lanka and even Pakistan. Now, the West has actually been coexisting with China in Pakistan, if you see, for a long time. IMF has just given a loan of 1.3 billion to Pakistan. Why do we find it so difficult, to coexist and to with China in the neighborhood, and to sort of?
I think it's a question of traditional ties, traditional why traditional actually you see historically religious, cultural ties. And so giving space to, if you're suggesting giving space to China should not be problematic in the neighborhood, I think would be absolutely incorrect. And in no way does it in any way go in our national interest. And so if you really see our national interest and our position insofar as South Asia is concerned, any Chinese gathering, while one is trade is normal, but any gathering footprint which directly impacts our national security, I think that definitely needs to be taken cognizance of.
Manikaran, any other questions?
No, sir, not yet. While we are waiting for a few more questions, I would put in one of mine. In this whole seminar, we have discussed quite a bit on geoeconomics. I had a similar question to Dr. Bhardwaj. India has a policy of neighborhood first, while with China's economic heft and BRI, we have seen not just its investments in India's neighborhood, but India's extended neighborhood. And we see that India and China are in an active competition with each other regarding these geoeconomic issues. We have launched few certain initiatives around the extended Indian neighborhood, we have partnered with various Western countries, Japan, and others to launch our initiatives. What are your views on the potential and successes of these Indian initiatives?
Look, as far as our neighborhood is concerned, they are small nations, they're poor nations comparatively. And so they are looking at, whatever economic benefits that they can get from the two major powers in Asia, which is India and China. Now, China has more, of course, to give and, to invest, and they have more surplus to build infrastructure in these areas, which we don't have that kind of a capacity and the capability at the moment. Yes, we are developing them, and till the time we have, but controlling the area or believing in, too much of focus on the Monroe Doctrine, as I would say, which believes that India has to control these entire regions. We have to really think, we really have to rethink as to how much of these areas we've been actually been controlling, even during the Cold War. Now with Bangladesh coup happening, for the first time, it actually came out that the kind of involvement which the Americans had over there, which the American, liberal establishment had established, the kind of networks which the American liberal establishment has established in these neighborhoods, we also need to take cognizance of that before making our strategies in terms of neighborhood first. Because, it's not just China, it's also the West which has been hugely involved. Bangladesh is hugely dependent on the West. Similarly, as I've said, IMF has been, and the World Bank has been, very much involved in all these countries. And all the debt that Sri Lanka owns is not just Chinese, for that matter. So therefore, we have to, these are the two big powers which are present in our neighborhood. And our entire focus cannot really be only China. Because then that would actually, prevent us from evolving a very nuanced strategy to engage with our neighbor.
Yes, thank you.
Well, can I just get in for a minute?
Please, sir.
Yes, sir.
So, precisely the reason why I have been saying, or I made this argument to say that while the view that we have lost space to China in our neighborhood was true, there are now reasons to believe that that is not entirely correct, and that the gathering footprint could actually be a receding footprint. And the shift that is noticeable that you are seeing is in Maldives, you're seeing it in Sri Lanka, you're seeing it in, I don't know how successful the government in this 18-month agreement and coalition is going to work in Nepal, or even in Bangladesh, because the fact that you said that Dr. Bhardwaj said about the US liberal order presence in Bangladesh is actually taken Chinese by a surprise. They lost a lot of space there. That's what I made this argument. So the point I'm trying to say is that there is a slow but steady concern of loss of Chinese space in India's neighborhood. And maybe that's the reason, one of the reasons that has, resulted in this thaw and this bilateral relations.
Thank you, sir.
Any more questions?
No, sir. I don't think we have any more questions right now.
Thank you, General Mandeep. Would you like to add anything more?
No, thank you so much. I just like to say, I'd like to thank you, everybody else at the ICS for giving an opportunity to share my views. I'm grateful. Hopefully, there'll be more such interactions in the future.
Thank you so much. It was a
Thank
pleasure
you,
listening to you, and pleasure. It's a fantastic discussion that we had.
Moderating this so well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you, ICS. And I would hand it over to Manikaran now.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I seek your permission to formally bring an end to today's session then.
Please.
With this, we come to an end of today's seminar. We thank Major General Mandeep Singh and Dr. Atul Bhardwaj for gracing today's seminar with their presence and for giving us their precious time. We also thank the audience for joining us today. The video of today's discussion shall be available on the ICS YouTube channel. We would like to invite you to the upcoming Wednesday seminar. Further information regarding the event can be found on the ICS website. You may also subscribe to our newsletter for regular updates. Thank you for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen.